Hello and welcome to Lean in Leander. I'm your host, Andrew Naudine, and this is episode 17 of the podcast. It's also the 8th in the Vote in Leander series, and I had the opportunity to sit down with a current council member who is running for mayor, Christine Sederquist, and we had some conversations about her life, some of the influences, where she's from, and some of her vision for Leander moving forward as she runs for mayor. And it was a good conversation. We found a really nice place to sit down and chat, and I hope you'll enjoy the episode. Now, before we get started again, a reminder, voteinleander.com. If you haven't already registered, you have until April 1st to do so. So hurry up. If you haven't done it, you've just got a few weeks left. Other than that, on the Vote in Leander site, you will find information on where to vote, the aforementioned registration information. You can sign up for reminders, things of that nature. So I certainly hope you'll take advantage of that site. Again, it's easy to remember, voteinleander.com. Now, with no further ado, here is episode 17 of the podcast. If you're watching online, grab a drink. If you're listening, turn it up a notch. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Hey everybody, I'm out here at the Sarita Valley Greenbelt, which is phenomenal out here in Leander, one of the hidden gems, and I'm sitting with Christine Sederquist. So obviously we're outside. We're going to kind of get rid of the masks and take off our ever so cool sunglasses as well and have a little bit of a chat. So Christine, thanks for taking some time to meet with me. I appreciate it. Great suggestion on location, by the way. I never would have found this by myself. I can tell you that for sure. Well, I might have. It would have taken me a while, though. So this is great. No benches, though, so maybe planning, for future. Anyway, but I appreciate you taking some time to sit with me. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Same. Thank you so much for inviting me out. And yeah, this is the Sarita Valley Greenbelt. We are on the east side of town, and it's so beautiful and gorgeous out here. And it is a shame that there aren't any benches yet. Because it's such a great place to just kind of sit back and enjoy. There's like a babbling brook just beyond our camera here, and it's fantastic and peaceful, but also a great place to walk.
Absolutely.
And a great highlight of our trail system here in town.
Sure, and this is Brushy Creek here.
This is, yes.
Okay, all right. So I have plans to bring my yoga mat out here. I mean, it'd be great. Anyway, like I said, thanks for the suggestion. I do want to be transparent, as I have been with all of my interviews, and just let you, the audience, know that Christine and I are actually acquainted. We know each other. We've had a couple of projects that we've worked on, committee assignments and things of that nature that I've been involved with. So we do know one another, but again, as with any of the other candidates, I've never had a beer with Christine. So it kind of tells you where we're at as far as familiarity with each other. So I'm going to ask a few questions of her today. We're going to talk a little bit about, where she comes from, some of the things that might influence the way she thinks, and what she thinks about Leander too. So let's start there. So obviously we're in Leander, Texas. How long have you been in Leander?
I have been here since June of 2010.
2010. Okay, so that's 11 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Kind of on it.
11 years is a long time in the scheme of things.
Especially in Leander.
Especially in Leander. Especially in Leander. I just had a jogger go by, and I want to thank him for staying out of the shot. That was very cool.
Yes.
Anyway, so 11 years, and I know from your bio that you have served in various community roles, such as PTA, Girl Scouts, Texas Humane Heroes. Tell us a little bit about that.
So PTA, when we first moved here, we lived out in just south of Benbrook in that section of North Creek, and we were at gym playing, and my kids went to school there for elementary, and I got really involved there. I was the secretary in the PTA, room mom, and then I became the president for a year, and then that was enough.
Enough with the PTA.
Enough with the PTA. So I took a break from that, and then later on my kids moved schools and they were at Founders for a while, and I was on the PTA board there as well, but not president. I did their communications there, and that was a really fun role to have. And then Texas Humane Heroes, I helped with some volunteer programming there, and the inaugural year of their grants commission, which was really cool, learning how to research all of these different animal welfare kind of grants to help pay for the immense needs that they have out there with, you know, capital improvements, the buildings, and as well as the care of the animals. And they're different grant programs. You can't just say, you know, we're helping animals and so we need money for all the things. Like, you have to do all of this research for what's for capital programs and what's for taking care of the animals specifically. And so it was really intensive and interesting. A lot of great people there.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So, and just to kind of, because I've been there when we were looking for a dog. Obviously, I wanted to try to do a rescue. That didn't necessarily work out for us, but I liked the facility. I just remember driving in, and it was kind of like a rough road, and I wasn't really ready for that part.
Yeah.
But they're not associated with the city of Leander in any direct way, right? It's a completely, is it a private organization, 501c3?
I can't remember now. I think they are a 501c3. They are nonprofit.
Okay.
And yeah, they're completely independent. That location used to be the Williamson County Animal Shelter before they built out in Georgetown.
Okay.
And so when they moved out to Georgetown, Humane Heroes took over, and they've just been doing great work.
Yeah, no, they were great people. And actually, we did find a dog there, but it was kind of like, we weren't quite ready. I wasn't quite ready, I should say that, because I was the one who was reticent about getting a new dog. I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this.
I want a new dog every time I go in there.
I know. I'm the same way. I'm like, okay, this dog's cool.
So here's what's interesting about them is they get their animals from all over the state, and they come from high kill shelters. So where Williamson County gets their animals is, you know, ones that are just running loose here in Williamson County. And Humane Heroes, their volunteers drive for hours every week to go to these high kill shelters out in the middle of nowhere to give the dogs and cats a second chance, and it's really beautiful. It's really
I think that's
work.
fabulous. Again, I mean, Drew Carey, shout out, spay and neuter your pets.
Yes.
But other than that, I think it's a fantastic thing that they do. And again, I really am inclined to, I've rescued pretty much every pet until Rousey, my current companion.
Rousey, that's cute.
Yeah, no, Rousey, she's a great dog. I'll feature her one day.
What kind of dog?
She's a Shepsky, technically. So she's a Shepherd and Husky mix.
Oh,
so she
must run a lot.
Well, she runs a ton. And she has all the Shepherd markings, but she has the Husky eyes.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, no, she's gorgeous.
My dog
gorgeous
is
and so smart.
Like a 9-pound little gray schnoodle. He's like a Schnauzer Poodle Terrier rescue mutt.
Right.
And he's 12. His name is Sergeant Pepper. He's
cool.
He's very cool. He comes with a rank.
Nice. So was that a Beatles reference there that I picked up on?
Absolutely.
Interesting. If you've seen my opening shots, I think you'll know that there's some Beatles fandom on my side.
Yes, and I love it.
My son actually gave me that poster, which it has some significant value from that perspective.
That's awesome.
But yeah, no, Sgt. Pepper's is actually my favorite album of the Beatles.
Awesome.
I'm kind of unique in that one is like, that one's my favorite.
Awesome.
I mean, not that I don't like them all, but you know, that one's my favorite. And it's weird how I got there too. This is a fun story. It's always about building relationship. I actually was introduced to Sgt. Pepper's when the Bee Gees redid it.
I did not know they redid it.
They did. I think it was a movie, as a matter of fact. Steve Martin was in it, the whole 9 yards. They did like this movie, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the Beatles did, or the Bee Gees did a majority of the soundtrack. It's not all Bee Gees, but they did a majority of it. It's actually very, very good.
I'm trying to imagine Barry Gibbs doing that.
Oh my God,
and it is blowing my mind.
It's actually very, very good. I recommend it this evening. I'm sure you can find it on Apple Music.
Totally. I will
or
look into
Spotify or any of the other ones.
Yeah.
Unless Apple wants to send a little bit of a sponsorship my way, that works. Anyway, that's great. So you mentioned your kids. So 2 kids, right?
Yep.
And they're both in high school now, or?
One's in high school, one's in middle.
Okay. All right. And so you still have a little bit to go before they're out the coop then, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and one of them is reminding me all the time that he's on his way out.
Yeah,
So,
the boys tend to
terrifies
do
me.
that. The boys tend to like, hey, I'm leaving. You know,
Yeah.
they're testing you, by the way.
He's like, when I'm done with high school, I'm out. I'm going to go move on my own. And I was like, well, how are you going to do that? And he's like, I don't know. Like, maybe we should think about
Very
this.
familiar. It does sound very familiar. So I want to kind of continue on that vein of, you know, committees and things of that nature, because I found what you have done previously and what you do now as it relates to municipalities. It's interesting. It's a little bit different than I think other candidates from an overall experience, like just where you're drawing experience from. So you were on the Capital Area Council of Governments.
I still am.
And you're
yes.
still on that, and you serve on the region's executive committee. So tell me a little bit about that. What do they do?
Sure. So it goes by an acronym, CAPCOG. And in CAPCOG, we have lots of acronyms. They literally give you a 2-page sheet of acronyms that they use when you join. But we handle a lot of regional issues. So we handle the law enforcement academy that most of the agencies around here use. We handle the emergency alert system, Warren Central Texas, which is why you always hear me promoting, sign up, warrencentraltexas.org or .com, either one will work. We also handle the 911 call centers for the entire 10-county region. And then we handle the area agency on aging. So if you have a family member that's a senior that needs assistance with finding care or a home or really anything, the state gives funding for programming to what's called COGS, Council of Governments. And they are responsible for handling all of those sorts of needs. So having like call-in numbers for seniors to just call up and say, I am having trouble with Medicare or finding senior housing or whatever, because a lot of our seniors are not necessarily tech savvy to find things on the internet, but also where do you go for things? You know, you enter in a search for senior housing, and you're going to get a million ads for different places. And the Area Agency on Aging is just a wonderful resource where it cuts out all of the distraction and just helps people 100% of the time. And they do amazing work.
So when you say we handle, what does that mean? Are you managing block grants and things of that nature?
We do.
Okay.
We do. We do grants, but we also have staff in-house that handles the call center or that go out and do visits with residents or with centers.
So there's some decision making there involved in those committees and whatnot. You guys are saying, okay, how do we do this best, and
yes,
that kind of stuff.
The executive committee, we oversee the broader functions and the more expensive functions. So there are grants for solid waste. There are grants for law enforcement. There are grants for aging stuff.
Okay.
and we oversee all of those applications from our advisory committees and, you know, decide yes or no, who's going to get the grants, what projects are worthy, and then major operational changes. So upgrading the 911 systems, that comes in front of the executive committee. We purchased a database last year that I'm super excited about all the time, which is its cell phone numbers. So even if you're not signed up for Warren Central Texas, there are some people now, depending on their carrier and whatnot, that we're able to reach if there's a critical emergency. We can push out, you know, a shelter-in-place sort of notification to more than just the people that opted in, because that number historically has been very low. It's hard to get people to go to warrencentraltexas.com and sign up for emergency alerts.
Okay, all right. That's interesting. That involvement obviously gives you a little bit of a different scope on things, you know, and you know, you currently are sitting on council, and it's place 4 that you're in,
Yes.
right? But you're not running for re-election in place 4. You're actually running for the mayoral position, which, again, what I always like to emphasize is that all of these are at large, okay? So they represent the entirety of the city of Leander,
Yep.
that they being any council members. And
we do not have
obviously,
districts.
right? No districts, no regions or anything like that.
I can tell you the reason to that too, because it comes up all the time and people don't know.
Okay.
It came up. I was the chair of the last Charter Review Commission, and we talked about that. And because it seems like you would want a representative that you can go to that understands your neighborhood and is going to be loyal to your issues. But because of the rate of growth, and we have so much undeveloped land, it was determined that it wouldn't be productive to do that, because we would have to redraw the lines constantly. And so our note that we put in for future charter reviews was to just keep reviewing it every time this comes up, and eventually hopefully move to districts, kind of like what Austin does, so that you have your own representative you can reach out to.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where that definitely would be conducive, I think, because of what you mentioned, just a more focused approach to that particular representation.
Right.
I'm always looking at that from a perspective of representation. I go through, and I'm always referring to it as representatives, okay? Because I think that when you start to provide that type of framing to representation, I think people understand that they have a say in that representation. I think far too often, this is my personal opinion, far too often the leadership moniker is bestowed on individuals who are in leadership roles, mind you. I'm not saying that they're not, but they're representatives, and that to me is a distinction that I think is very important to make.
Yeah.
Because at no point is anybody elected outside of the mayoral race to quote unquote a leadership position. And if you read the city charters, you understand that. And you also understand that the mayoral role is a leadership within the council itself.
Yes.
Which is interesting. I always find that very interesting. And it's a unique setup. I don't know if it's unique to Leander, but I think it's unique in the smaller cities in Texas. I think that they all kind of, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but they do tend to follow, the legislation. The state legislation really kind of indicates the direction where to go, and then the cities will follow that along because they don't want to be outside of the bounds of the state legislation, generally speaking.
There's that, and I'm going to get super nerdy here, so warning. There's that, but then there's also just trends in governing. So I'm also on the National Civic League's working group for the Model City Charter that gets put out every, I think, 5 or 10 years. They do an update, and it just kind of gets put out nationwide as these are things you might want to look at. And we have spent a ton of time talking about elections and governance, and there's representatives from all over the country that are on this working group. I think there's 7 or 8 of us. And the trends in things. So for a while it was trendy to not have districts, to be at large, and most new governments were doing that. And then people felt like they wanted district representation, and so that became the trend. But then people felt like, the other representatives don't care for them. So now the new trend that's emerging is having a mix of both, where you have your district rep and like 2 at-large representatives. And we see the same thing in mayoral duties and how mayors are elected. In some places, they are chosen from the council. So everybody runs for a council seat, and then the council selects the mayor, and that turns over like every year. In some places, like Liberty Hill, the mayor is elected, but they're not a voting part of the board. And if you love to nerd out like me on policy, there's just like this rabbit hole of options you can get into.
I think it's really interesting because, and I've spoken with, I can't remember who I was talking to before, and it was in one of the Vote in Leander series where we did discuss a little bit, obviously, with the growth. Actually, I take that back. It wasn't. It was on the ethics committee, which I sit on the ethics committte.
Are you able to tell me this?
I think so.
I think you can.
I think I can. We'll edit it out if we can't. No, just kidding. So there was a question brought to us about the forms that any candidate would be filling out. And our general decision was that it's too close to the election to make any changes, so let's push this off for later. But it's interesting because the state legislature actually has rules in place that affect that once you reach 100,000. And I was on the committee saying, guys, we're at 70 right now, so literally if we don't do anything, this takes care of itself in a couple of years. You know, so let's just leave it as it is until we hit that number, and then, you know, obviously the state, it becomes a state default. Why change it and then change it again? Yeah. So that was kind of, or at least let us study that so that the changes that we do make are in line with the current legislation. So I found it really interesting. And again, it kind of in the scheme of what we're talking about, I don't think I get quite as nerdy as Christine does on this stuff.
Very few people get as nerdy as Christine does.
but it's informative and it's interesting because for me, again, you know, governance is very complex.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a very complex.
It's its own world.
Yeah. I mean, and I know some people think of it as like, you know, current events and things of that nature, but truly, those are just flavors in the gumbo that is governance. You know, because I think there's so many issues and there's so many levels at which, you know, issues will affect one another, that it becomes a very, very difficult thing to stay holistic when you're looking at issues. You know, whether it be Leander or Liberty Hill or Austin.
Right.
You know, I mean, sometimes I look at Austin and I'm like, wow, not only do they have to worry about governing their own city, they have to worry about the state coming in and telling them things because the state capital is here too.
Yes.
Which is really
and how
interesting.
They impact the region.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're so big. Whatever they do affects all the rest of us. I don't worry when we're doing things on the dais that we're going to affect Austin.
Yeah, no, it's not the other way around. Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. 100%. So, I kind of want to take a little bit of a jig here and kind of go back just to give people a little bit more flavor, Christine. So you moved here, you've been here about 11 years. Mm-hmm. Where did you come from?
Okay. Everyone in Leander mostly is from somewhere else.
Which was why I asked the question.
Disclaimer. I am one of those Californians that has moved here.
Okay.
Yeah, one of them.
One of them.
One of them.
Yeah,
but I will say most of the Californians that I've met that have come here are from Southern California where they have sunshine like this. Mm-hmm. I'm from Northern California where it's cold all the time.
Right.
Every day.
Right. So kind of San Francisco-ish area? Or?
I grew up right next to Oakland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Cool. Yeah, the Raiders used to be from there.
Yes. And then they weren't, and then they were again.
And then now they're not. So.
And now they're not again.
Anyway. Yeah, that's interesting. I had an episode where I talked to Chris Sersnick. Okay. And just really quick, Chris went to California Lutheran University, which is about...
Southern California.
Yes, Southern California, and it's north of Los Angeles. Yeah. But my son went there too.
Oh, how cool.
And it was funny because when we bought our house, somehow it came up in the conversation. And Chris, not only did he go to California Lutheran, where my son was actually at the time going, he still is. Actually, he's about to finish up. He's the number 2 quarterback all time in passing, and the number 4 in total scoring or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. But it was funny because when I met with him, I popped that on him, and I don't think he expected me to go there. You know, I was like, hey, by the way. And it was just funny. It's really funny because I think what it does, in my opinion, is that it really, like you said, most people in Leander are not from Leander.
Right.
You know, they've moved here. They've chosen this city.
When I moved here, it was in the papers that the population had just hit 30,000.
Right.
And now we're up over 70.
Yeah, it's doubled in 11 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the current trend is like 3 new families every week or something like that. It's crazy how fast it's going. And now you have all of these pressures on the economics of the city because of, you know, COVID obviously affected things. And then, you know, that has a ripple effect on building and the availability of homes and all that kind of stuff. So it's really an interesting time for Leander, which is why I wanted to do these and sit down with each candidate and talk about it and make it a little bit more personal. And we've gotten a little wanky here with some of the politics of it. But I think it's interesting to get those insights, like what because I think all of that flavors how a person thinks Like how they
Absolutely.
go about their process because of the influences that they've had.
Growing up in an inner city area completely changes how you look at things. You know, I used to refer to Leander as Mayberry because compared to where I came from,
Yeah,
it
for
really
sure.
is.
For
Like,
sure.
this is amazing. You don't get this
No.
so much. In,
No, not so much in Oakland. Not
not
at
so
all.
much. I mean, there are areas.
There's spots.
There are spots.
There's spots.
But like the city I grew up in is just south of there. It's called Hayward. Nobody's ever heard of it. But it's not like this at all. You know, it's got gang graffiti. It's got high dropout rates in school. It's got high crime. A lot of just random violence. And it's horrible. And that was part of the reason why I didn't want to raise my kids out there.
Right.
You know, I wanted to come to the suburban dream, and like what I always saw on TV when I was a kid. You know, my dream as a kid was to live in a 2-story house. Like, and now as an adult, I'm like, that's kind of a weird dream to have, but it's, it seemed like that was something that was only for special people, and out here it's so just not a thing. So I don't know. I just wanted to raise my kids in a place that was safe and wholesome, where they could walk down the streets and I didn't have to worry about them. And in governance, I feel like all of that background it's always in the back of your mind. When we're doing X, Y, Z, what is happening to the city? Are we turning into one of these super urbanized areas? Are we going to lose that Mayberry feel? One of the things that I loved when we first moved here, there's a bug, was how small town the feel was. Like, everybody knows each other, and you go to the Easter egg hunt. I feel like Mike Pence right now.
You didn't land.
It's good. You go to the Easter egg hunt, and there's government officials walking around saying hi to you, which is like, from this side of it, it's like, well, why would anybody want to talk to me? But I have to remind myself that when I was on the other side of it, that meant a lot to me, And I just love the connection of the people. And I think that does so much for a community, because in large urbanized cities, you don't have that. You stay in your bubble, and you go into your home, and you just take care of yourself, and you don't look out for your neighbor. And I want to do everything I can to preserve the feel that we have right now, and never get to that point.
Yeah, and it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a challenge because there are competing factors there.
Yep.
I've said this before too. People will say, well, Leander's a small town. I want to keep that small town. And I'm like, there's like 70,000 people here.
Yeah.
That's not small. I mean, that's not small. And I hate to say it this way, but the reality is that it's no longer a small town.
Correct.
It's a large city, looking to see what the final identity of the city will be.
Yep.
And I think this area, this is gorgeous, and we're enormously blessed from that perspective, in the sense that we live in Central Texas, which is it's beautiful out here. I know now, having lived in West Texas, having lived in East Texas, now I know why. Okay, this is why they were calling it God's country and all that kind of stuff back in the day. Because if you came upon this and you're a wagon trail guy or whatever, that's why Davy Crockett was here. It's beautiful.
We're
It's
in like
gorgeous.
this perfect little pocket.
Yeah, no, and weather and everything else. I mean, there's things that are changing, but overall you have wonderful weather most of the year, and so it becomes very enticing to kind of want to stay that way.
Yeah.
Definitely. But the reality is that the economic pressures that are being put on the greater of Central Texas are such that those two things are competing with each other.
Definitely.
Because you're not going to be able to, you're going to be able to keep certain aspects of this, but you're not going to be able to keep this. It's unfortunate. I think this would be preserved. Like, this type of environment is preserved. I think if the city does enough to preserve these types of environments, then it creates a balance, a work-life balance, or a life-living balance, however you want to call it. And that's important moving forward in creating what Leander will be. So the reason I say that is because I'm kind of going somewhere.
Okay.
Bear with me. So you've sat on council for the last 3 years, okay, and you've had some involvement in the city, you know, from a community aspect before that. So you've seen the changes that got us here. We just touched on the, you know, doubling size. Where do you see it going forward? What do you see?
Well, so that's perfect, because I was about to jump in there a minute ago and say something, and this totally fits. You can still grow and be a bigger city and preserve the small town feel. It's something that I saw out in California. Not every city around us was the same as the city I grew up in. And they still had the large populations, they still had the traffic on the freeway going through town, but they still had the small town festivals and the congregating places, you know, that people would get to, and they still had that feel. And a lot of that, I think, is just planning with intentionality. So when you talk about the trail, you know, we have a trail master plan in the city, and so all of the tracts of land have already been identified where the trails are going to go. And as developers come to us and say, I want to build here, we say, okay, this part of your land is set for trails, so this is going to come out of your parkland dedication, because like housing developments have to set aside so many acres per number of residents, basically, that go towards parkland. So this would have been part of a parkland dedication. Eventually, this trail system is going to go all the way through town, and it's going to meet up with Gary Park, and it's going to be fantastic. And that intentionality is what's going to preserve it. It's going to keep that trail from ending right up there. And we can do that in other areas of the city as well. If we start with knowing where we're going to be, or where we intend to be in 50 years, 25 years, 10 years, we can intentionally plan how we get there. And that means being intentional about our water, our roads, our festivals, you know, how we communicate with people. And I think we can get there. I really do.
It's interesting because, you know, again, that's challenging.
Yes.
That's challenging.
I didn't say it would be easy. I said we could get there.
But I think that's, again, for me, that's a good way to be thinking about it, is that, you know, if we know where we get, like, then you start to bring up things like the comprehensive plan and things of that nature that start to.
That's just a baby step.
I mean, those are influencers to this grander scheme, and I do like to, especially within the Vote in Leander series, I like to talk about that 15-year vision. Alex Steinberg with the North Line, I always use that, and it's not intentional. I never intended to use that as the marker, but it's become the marker for these conversations, because almost to a candidate, I've brought that up, and we've talked about that. I know from my conversations with Alex that it took him about 7 years to get where he is right now, and it'll take him about another 10, maybe even 15 years to get to where that project is fully realized.
Right. And people don't realize
no,
that.
They
don't.
They
say, like, well, Northline was approved. Where is it?
Right.
It takes
so a long time.
So
it takes
long.
A really, really long time. But, you know, how that fits into the intentionality, I think, is what you used, is always really interesting to me, because from a holistic perspective, you're like, okay, you have this dense urban area that you're going to create. And the only thing that I can think of, the related city, when I look at it from a city to city comparison, would be Plano, which is north of Dallas, which I think it was Plano, where FC Dallas is located, where the soccer team. I obviously I'm telling you where I know it from. Frisco. It was Frisco.
Okay.
Frisco, Texas is the only other city that I can think of where I was like, they got huge. Like, boom. It was crazy how fast that got there. But there was this intentionality of planning, because when Frisco started planning, they built FC Dallas, the stadium for FC Dallas. They built this great big soccer facility. They've got 29 or 31 fields out there. They've got turf fields. They've got grass fields. It's insane. It's a European styled kind of complex. But it was in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing there. I remember some of the games that we went to compete with my son's team, and we'd get there and we were like, where do you even eat? I mean, it was just crazy, and you'd have to stay miles away in hotels because there was nothing there.
Wow.
But now you go,
And it's all
and
popped up.
it's crazy. It's like playing in Pflugerville. And again, even Pflugerville was like that.
Yeah.
I remember, because again, we're traveling in from Houston, we're going to Pflugerville.
Who's heard of that?
Who named that? Is what,
Right?
you know, like
With a P.
With a P, exactly. You know, but I mean, no offense, Pflugerville, we love you. But the whole idea there was like you didn't know where to stay, and
Yeah.
you were staying far out. But now you go to tournaments there, and it's grown
It's
into
dense.
those ideas.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting when I start talking about what Leander's doing, because I'll be frank, from my perspective, as a citizen, when I got here, I said, I'm going to get involved.
Yeah.
I'm going to I want to know my neighbors. I want to know my community. I want a guy who lives to the left, that lives to the right, or gal, or whatever it might be. And I want to be intentional in that.
Yeah. You're invested here.
And yes, because I have invested here.
Yeah.
I have invested
Not
here.
just your dollars, but
Not
your
just
life.
my dollars, but my life. Exactly. And I don't know that, again, I don't know if this is going to be the forever place, but at least at this point, I'm like, I don't plan to go anywhere anytime soon. So with that, what I'm getting to is like, I look at things and I'm like, I don't know that I necessarily see some of that intentionality. I mean, it's wonderful to have these conversations because you've educated me here today. Okay, like the Brushy Creek stuff, I had some tacit understanding of that. Now I just, by talking to you now, like, oh, okay, I get that. That makes more sense. You know, but we talked about what the future looks like in Leander. So how do we, and I feel it's fair because you are currently a sitting council member. And I don't try to go there with most people that I've talked to because, again, I want to give people an opportunity to get to know you. But you're already maybe somewhat a little bit better known, you know, just because you've already been involved in the politics of the city. For people who don't know you or maybe just new here, you know, this is really meant to kind of give them some insight as to who you are as a person. But from a perspective as a council member, someone who's influencing where those things will go, how do we address some of those challenges? I mean, what is it that we can do? Because you're inheriting certain decisions that were made long before you got here.
Yep.
And you've got to be able to really recalculate certain decisions because it's required. You have no other choice.
Right.
Yet at the same time, be forward thinking.
Yeah.
So
I will say that has been one of my biggest frustrations since I've been on council is there are certain things where, yeah, there's a plan. It's long term. It's been planned out. All we have to do is stay on track and we're good. But then there's other things where there is zero plan. And I'm like, where are we going with this? How do we know we're going in the right direction? Why are we throwing money at this without knowing where we're going to end up? Like, I'm the kind of person that when I go on vacation, I make a color-coded like itinerary for every day. I need to know where I'm going with things. And sometimes it feels like we don't have that sort of foresight on things. So everybody wants to know about the water system. There have been plans for the water system in place for a long time. We didn't necessarily keep up with them as much as we should have. And we've learned a lesson, and we need to make sure that we are keeping up going forward. What I haven't seen any foresight for is what happens in 20 or 30 years when all of this boom, all of this construction that's happening at once has all this infrastructure that all starts degrading at the same time. We need to make sure that as we're planning this growth, we're not just planning the next 10 years of water, but that we're planning the next 50 years. Because if we get there and we can't replace pipes, we become flint. And currently that isn't going on. When we're dealing with budgets, we're dealing with 1 year at a time. I would like to see sort of a prediction for where we're going to be in 5 years, because we know that we need to grow our police department. We know that we need to grow our planning department, our engineering. We know all of these places that we need to grow, and that creates a salary year over year. It's not like, you know, buying a fire station where you pay for it once. Well, I mean, technically you would have like a whole bunch of staffing, but so that's part of it too. But we know that with this growth comes more costs for things. And so I think it's important when we're planning and making those decisions of whether or not we're okay with something going in, that we're looking ahead to what all of those ancillary costs are going to be, and that we have the money set aside. If we have to hire 3 more police officers next year, how much more do we need to bring in this year over last year's amount? And how much more are we going to project that we need in 3 more years as those people get salaries and benefits and all the things after they're onboarded? And I think that's really important because we don't want to be caught flat-footed later on.
No, I think it is. And it also, it highlights the complexity that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And it also underscores for me, which is probably one of the most important factors, this is all voluntary work.
Yeah.
Okay, nobody gets paid to do this.
It blows people's minds.
It's crazy. I don't get it. I mean, it seems to me...
me either.
It seems to me that's something that at a point should be addressed because it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be frank. I am looking at this and I'm saying, this is a really complex process, complex issues, and this is someone's other thing. Like, you have a normal job. Like, you do something that pays the bills, which is, if I remember correctly, you do marketing.
Digital marketing.
And digital marketing, okay? I think social media areas. Okay, all right. So she does digital marketing. That pays the bills. That's a full-time job. Just like, I'm fortunate. I always look at myself as very fortunate in the sense that I'm entrepreneurial and kind of do things a little bit more non-traditional from that perspective. But I still have to pay bills. Yeah. So I have to find ways to be able to, take my skill sets and apply them to different projects. Whether it be consulting or actually working for somebody, whatever the case might be. But that's a full-time job. That takes all sorts of time. Yeah. And so then to say, okay, hey, I'm going to be on the council, and on any given Thursday, there's 10 agenda items. And I'm like, and you had
10.
Well, okay.
40.
Anyway, let's say 10 just to make it easy.
Okay. That's a tiny town.
Well, I mean, but
Mayberry.
So if you look at the agenda, there's like 8 things that you did the last time.
Yeah, there's a bunch
of
consent
okay,
items.
did we all agree
That's
on all
fair.
this stuff? Yeah, okay.
I'm just razzing you.
And then there's another 10.
Yeah.
And the new 10 are the ones that I'm like, okay, you had 2 weeks to prep for that, and then you have 2 more weeks to prep for the next group.
We have 1 week.
See, that
Staff
to me is...
has 2 weeks,
that's
but
crazy.
we get the agenda the Friday before.
And staff is leading a lot of the charge on the day-to-day kind of stuff. And I recognize that. They get paid. To do that, but the council comes in and kind of as a supervisory kind of role.
It's exactly like CapCog.
Yeah.
We come in and we vote on the overall policy and where the money goes, but it is the staff that is on the ground every day making it happen, answering the phones.
Right. Or not.
Or not.
It just depends. And that's not a bump on the staff. There's a lot of reasons why the phones don't get answered.
Stretched.
Yeah,
so
they're super
thin.
stretched, and we had the snowpocalypse, which, all sorts of crazy stuff.
Good times with that.
Like I said, there's a lot of issues in Leander. There's a lot of things to talk about, and I definitely appreciate your perspective on a lot of things. And I appreciate the time that you've taken, not only to volunteer of yourself as a council member, a sitting council member for the last 3 years. That was a decision you made 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Or 4, maybe. I don't know. Thank you for that, because I think it's appropriate to thank people for their time when they're doing that type of thing, regardless of who they are, regardless of how you might feel about the decisions and the things that they do. You still, hey, that's a huge thing to do. So I appreciate that, and I want to tell you from my perspective, thank you for that, and give you an opportunity to chat with the folks and tell them where they can find you while you're doing the campaign.
Okay. Well, I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter a little bit, Christine Sederquist. I think it's Christine LTX. On Facebook, Christine for Leander, or if you search Christine Sederquist, if you can just spell that off the top of your head, because it's easy. Christine #4 Leander makes it really easy. And that's also my website address, christineforleander.com. I try to stay fairly consistent. And I'm on Instagram, so I'm there too.
So that's where you can find
Reach me
Christine.
anywhere.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure you'll be out in the community doing the campaigning and all that stuff. So we look forward to seeing you there. Wish you the very, very best of luck on your campaign.
Thank you.
And I'm going to end on the note, if you haven't already been to the website, voteinleander.com for all the important dates, registration information, reminders, things of that nature. Definitely encourage all of you watchers and listeners, get involved. Vote. And I appreciate you doing so. I think Christine will too, a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
All right, guys, that's it for this episode. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.